Everyone. It is a journey on the road on this episode of Words, Images, and Worlds with comics creator, media creator Jerry Carita. Jerry, thank you for jumping in, joining, and talking with me for a few minutes.
Thank you for having us, having me.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love the majestic plural. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
us. We're
absolutely.
very happy to be here. You
Well,
and I are both very happy to be here.
Well, absolutely. We are as well, me and this glass of water that I have here, absolutely. Now, I'm going to mention a couple of titles that I've unearthed that perhaps are linked with you, one of those being Grizzly Crew. Is this true?
Okay. This is true. This
And
is true.
Cicada Samurai, which is great alliteration. Great alliteration.
Okay. Thank you. Guilty. That also me. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Now you have also been creating in the world of one Mr. Scott Snyder. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So Scott does a writing workshop class that he operates through his Substack, Our Best Jacket. And um it's it's basically, he used to do it more frequently, but every Wednesday, every other Wednesday, he would have a class and it would be a live stream, and everyone in his group would listen. And some of us are, um I guess a few years ago, three or four of the kids in the class, I say kids, they're probably a lot of them are my age, but a lot of people in the class decided to put together an anthology project. So this way, people who were actually there not just to listen to Scott talk, which he's like him talking the process of making comics is like amazing, but
Hmm.
they actually wanted to apply what they were learning to a story. So they were writing stories and trying to find artists, and so this group of students decided to do an anthology, of all just stories that people wrote, that are sort of connected to their time in the class. They did 120 pages. I think it was 18 stories. It's called Tales from the Cloakroom,
Hmm.
which is a tie into the Best Jacket, the name of Scott's thing. And then a year later, a completely different group of students decided to do the same thing. So Tales from the Cloakroom, Volume 2. And then around the time that was coming out, my partner is Veronica Howell, we're both in the class. We decided to take over the project and turn it into smaller issues and more of like roughly a quarterly thing. So we've done two issues so far. It's called simply The Cloakroom. Scott Snyder presents The Cloakroom.
Hmm.
We've done two Kickstarters so far. We're about to launch the third one sometime in the next few days. And this issue is a holiday issue, but it's all stories that are created by people in Scott's class. Ideally, we like to ask the students to write something for us to print in the book about something they learned from Scott that they applied to their story, that they applied to their craft, or something like that. Some connection to the little community that sort of sprung up around Scott and this class that he does. And the new issue is a holiday issue, so this is the new thing. I don't write. Veronica and I have not yet written a story. We're both planning to write stories that will be in the anthology, but it was an opportunity for the two of us to exercise a different creative muscle, which is the
Nice.
editorial one. So it's
Yeah.
logistical. It's like making sure the trains are running on time, but you're also trying to help a creative team take their story and make it the best possible version of their story that it can be without being like a writer and saying like, well, here's how I would write it. It's
Hmm.
not really
Hmm.
about me. It's a different part of your brain you're using. And we've both really enjoyed doing that. So it's been a really rewarding experience. We have a third issue coming out. We're doing at least two more in the new year. And I would keep doing this project until Scott tells us to stop putting his name on it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I love stepping into the role of editor because it's like this opportunity to sort of let other people shine in a way.
Yeah.
So that's rewarding in its own way, I imagine, to sort of invite others in and say, here's this project. What do you have? And how can we help you kind of envision that and help it to come to life?
Yeah, it's just a completely different part of your brain if you're a creative person. So
Hmm.
like I've written Cicada Samurai, Grizzly Crew. These are stories that I'm writing. Um, so it's hard to resist the urge to just think about how you would tell this story or what you would do with this scenario that someone else created. But it's really rewarding. I kind of enjoy the process almost more than writing myself, I think.
Hmm.
That's what
Hmm.
I've learned over this year and a half, 2 years of doing this. is that I think when I sit down at a computer and it's a blank page and I have to write something myself, I find that to be sometimes insurmountable. But
Yeah.
if you come to me and you say, I have this idea, here are 5 elements, here's like a scene I want to see, that I had this, a funny thing happened, I think I could turn it into a story, and you have a handful of pieces, like you call me at 4 in the morning with that story, and I'll stay up the whole rest of the night with you, bouncing ideas back and forth and helping you figure out where to put your pieces together to build the puzzle that you've just found in pieces in your brain. So it's really rewarding and fun. And so far we've had 15, 16. I think we're up to 24 short stories. They're all between 2 and 12 pages long. And we've got, like I said, 2 more issues coming. So I think we're going to get up to about 50 stories by the time this is all said and done, at least. And like I said, I'll keep it going. I've had so much fun doing it.
Nice, nice. Yeah, dude. Well, we'll circle back to talking about Scott Snyder and your collaboration and editing and work there. I'm curious about how you connected with comics in general, being somebody that's created in media and been involved in media. How did comics become part of your story?
So it was two things that were happening at the same time. One was I'm a television producer. So my day job is I produce unscripted television. I've worked on History Channel shows, Discovery Channel, Netflix. A show called Swap Shop. Counting Cars is one that a lot of people have heard of. I used to direct Wife Swap and American Pickers,
Hmm.
many years ago. I've had I'm 44. I've been working in unscripted TV for about 15 or 16 years now, so I've had a pretty long career at it. And about 10 years ago, I did a show, first season of a show called Comic Book Men. And,
Hmm.
I was working at the company that produced the show. Kevin Smith got this show on AMC. And
Hmm.
I was a fan of Kevin, from just, I mean, I'm a New Yorker. He's a Jersey like creator, Jersey kid made good. So I was always rooting for him. And I found out he was doing this show, and I went to the people running the production company. I'm like, I now work on this show. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I kind of forced my way into it. And so I did that show, and basically I spent, almost a year hanging out in a comic book shop and just talking comics with these guys who were in the show. As a kid, I never had that moment where someone handed me a comic and I was like, oh, these are my people. I never had that, that moment. For me, when I was a kid, my geek thing was always TV. I used to watch like
Hmm.
the X Files was very big when I was 13, 14 years old. My mom was a big Trek fan, Star Trek fan. So the Next Generation, that's my Star Trek, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Things like that. So I was always into that. So I never had that moment of comics, but then I worked on this show and I started reading comics in the shop there, like while in between takes, and while I would take books home at night, they'd let me borrow stuff. So the first comic book series I read was The Walking Dead. And I never, I didn't start with superheroes. I think a lot of people at least start with superheroes. Some people leave the superheroes behind at some point. I never really had a big superhero thing. I went back and did all my homework once I started reading comics and got really into it. I read all of Chris Claremont's X-Men books. I read a ton of Batman and Superman from like all the hits, all the
Hmm.
hits. And then the other thing that was going on at the same time is my cousin is James Tynan, and he was just starting to write comics at DC Comics.
Hmm.
So while I was reading The Walking Dead and all these indie books I was cutting my teeth on, I started reading all the New 52 and for a little while, I was reading all of the Bat books.
Yeah.
Anything with a bat. And it was a lot of books. It was,
Yes.
they went from that. I think it was New 52 because there were 52 titles, and it was pretty quickly a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So, but those two things were happening simultaneously. So I started getting into it because of my cousin. I started getting into it because of a TV show. And I just fell in love with it. It's just so much fun, and it's like you're not constrained by a budget. I mean, it costs money to produce a comic, but way less than producing a TV. Like if I want to do a TV show or a movie about time travel with like science fiction elements, that's a lot of money. You got to convince someone to give you $300 million, and that's a lot of million. That's a lot of millions. That's a lot of millions of dollars.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I found this was a lot, very rewarding, and I started falling in love with some of the storytellers I was reading. I just like I read everything Jeff Johns did with the Green Lantern, that whole world building thing that he did. Um, all the different colored lanterns and all the whole spectrum. I love like it's just great. And then like I said, I mostly indie, and so now most of what I read now is stuff I get from Kickstarter or stuff that's
Nice.
directly recommended to me by indie people like my cousin, like things that like Scott will talk about reading.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
But that's
that's
it. I kind of
cool.
got into it late, so I was like 34, 35 when I really started reading comics for the first time.
I love that story. That's not a story that you hear all the time, and I love the connection and kind of how like the creative community and fandom pulled you in, and not only that, but pulled you into. I know James does, of course, the DC books, but then there are all sorts of books that he does that are outside of that realm, and Scott does as well that are sort of like in the comics horror genre as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, he's been doing he hasn't been with DC in a while. I think he had a plan. I think his plan was to be at DC for longer than he was, but then
mhm,
a couple of the indie books that he started launching while he was still at DC just took off. Something is Killing the Children
mhm,
just
mhm.
exploded, and I think it all happened a lot faster than he thought it would. So now he's completely independent. He's running his own Tiny Onion Studios, which is a play on our family, the family name, my mom's maiden name, Tynan. And so yeah, horror and all kinds of thriller elements. He can do whatever he wants now. It's kind of interesting. It's interesting listening to Scott talk about making comics and sort of it is very much a class where you're learning structure. You're learning
Mhm.
about page turns and the three-act structure of Western storytelling. And then when someone gets to a point, it's like when Quentin Tarantino started making movies, he could do whatever he wanted at a certain point.
Mhm.
James is kind of there with comics. I think he's earned the audience's trust. So he doesn't have to start in act one in his story. He can kind of do what he wants and
Yeah.
kind of mess with the storytelling technique. So it's horror, it's thriller, it's like some of it is just kind of action, like Erica Slaughter in Something is Killing the Children. That's just Batman. That's just a superhero right there, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
like a detective superhero character. Um, so yeah, it's all over the map, and yeah. Anyway, that's how I got into it all, and that's where I'm at now. So I still read a lot I read everything he writes, obviously. I read everything Scott writes, obviously. I'm actually in the middle of an older book that a friend of mine recommended. It's called Claus, and it's the origin story of Santa Claus by um, Grant Morrison and Dan Mora,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is which is like hilarious. Just like Grant Morrison is this very kind of heady, intellectual comic book writer, and then he's like, I'm going to write about Santa Claus, you know.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
great. It's great. It's just so much fun.
So what was the moment when the creative spark happened and you were inspired to start telling your own stories, being somebody that had consumed the media and had consumed across media?
So I'd always had I'd always had ideas for stories I wanted to tell, but mostly I thought of them in terms of scripted television and film.
Hmm.
And when I started thinking about comics and creating my own comics, I didn't want to just take an idea that I thought would make a good movie and try and convert it to a comic book. I wanted to write something that I felt like worked as a comic and might not work in any other genre. Like
Hmm.
mash
Hmm.
up things that don't quite make sense together, maybe, and come up with something original and weird that would be really hard to do well as an animated thing or a movie or a TV series. And so this was during the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic. I have three kids, and keeping those three kids alive is a very like high anxiety thing.
Yeah.
And during
Yeah.
the pandemic, that was at a peak. That was like peak anxiety for a lot of people. So I had that going on in the back of my head. And then at the same time, I think it was in 2021, there was this enormous emergence of cicadas all across the country, the northeast of the country.
Hmm.
And so it was in the news. It was like the Brood X and Brood whatever were going to come out at the same time, and it was going to be the biggest, noisiest summer ever. And I'm nerdy, so I just became obsessed with cicadas, and I started reading about them and watching videos and all this stuff. And like, I just took those things and kind of mashed them together because cicadas, the one brood comes out every 17 years. So and then they get above. They've been underground, kind of living in seclusion for 17 years, just like suckling at tree roots and waiting. They emerge, they break out of their shell, they party for like 3 weeks, and they drop dead. And that's their
Hmm.
whole lifespan, and then
Yeah.
they lay eggs and they die. And so I started to think of that as, okay, this is a group of 17-year-olds who are going, they're all going, and there's a billion of them, and they're all going to prom night to make bad decisions on the
Yeah.
same night, all of them. So I thought to myself, okay, well, what if one of them had some kind of immortality and came back every generation and was
Hmm.
always around? So there's only one person with any life experience, and he's the Cicada Samurai. And so he's imbued with these magical fighting ability, and his job is to protect all these teenagers that are trying to make bad decisions because they know they only have 3 weeks to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was it. It was basically like my parenting anxiety coupled with a nerdy obsession with bugs. And I was like, Cicada Samurai, and good luck anyone trying to turn that into a TV show. You know what I mean?
I love that. Well, and I remember reading at sort of the outset of the pandemic, which we all, endured in the best way we could. I remember reading that creative people would find those opportunities during that time to sort of explore ideas. So what a great sort of mingling of different inspirations, your own anxieties and thoughts, plus what was happening in the news, plus a little research, plus a little alliteration. I love it.
Yeah, I just sat around. I was just like, it seemed like it would be fun, and like, do you know Hedwig and the Angry Inch? Like
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
musical.
Yeah.
Okay, so John Cameron Mitchell, who's the creator and played Hedwig for like 15 years, off Broadway here in New York. He talked about making that project, and he said he basically just took three things that he liked that made no sense together and mashed them together.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it was, 70s like glam rock and punk rock and like an obsession with communist East Berlin. And he kind of turned it into this ludicrous but hilarious and wonderful story. And so I kind of just was like, okay, well, here are the three things going on in my head. I'm going to put them together and we'll see what happens. And I've kind of had a lot of fun trying to put that character into awful situations. It's a violent book. It's very, I got very lucky. I reached out to Takashi Okazaki, who did Afro Samurai. Um,
Hmm.
and he was into it. I just sent him a message on Instagram and I was like, hey, real like long shot here, but I had this idea. And he wrote back and he was like, yeah, totally into it. Let's do character designs. So he did my original character designs. And then he got very busy. He does like Star Wars visions now for Marvel. So
Yeah.
he's booked. He's booked pretty solid. There's a lot of animation work too. So
Yeah.
he did my original designs though, and then I found this wonderful artist in Canada. Her name is Mary Landro, and she has a slightly less. His style is very manga, and hers is much more anime. If there can be a difference between the two, but I think you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so she she took it to a very kind of gory, violent place, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And and so I've just had a lot of fun writing that story and kind of you're terrified that your kids are going something's going to happen to your kids. That's what the story is about. So every once in a while, even when he does his absolute best, some of these billions of kids are just not going to make it.
Yeah.
And it can be violent and awful. And I've had a lot of fun, kind of putting people in terrible situations. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of putting people in terrible situations, learning from Scott Snyder, I'm sure has its own benefits. And I'm curious about, of course, the latest creation. I just read Absolute Batman, which has been hyped for like months now. And so
Right.
I've got his storytelling kind of in my head as far as the boundaries that he's pushing. So curious about how that anthology has come to be and what you're hoping to accomplish with this Kickstarter that's soon to be in the world. Cicada-like crawling up from the roots, if you will.
That's it.
There's a little connecting
Emerging.
point. That's right.
Well, I'd like to imagine that this whole Kickstarter process and sort of what we're doing with the book right now is all part of the gestational process, and that
Hmm.
it'll emerge about another year from now. So I think what we're going to try and do, and what Veronica and I have talked about doing is, once we had, 6 or 7 issues under our belt, we're talking about ways to kind of repackage it and release it in the direct market. So, every Kickstarter has had a retailer tier or two retailer tiers, and we've had some support. We actually had some pretty good support from stores. Um, but what I think we want to do is take it and turn it into more of a graphic novel series or maybe a hardcover series or something like that. And take it out and put it more in traditional in comic book shops and see how we do. And just kind of get these creations, these people's stories out there into the world. That's the goal. I don't know if we'll get there. I'm not sure. We have to go back and kind of readdress all those ideas with the creators. So far, everyone has been fantastic to work with. We haven't had very, very few, bad like complaints at all about anything
Mhm.
with the creators we've been working with. So hopefully we just get to keep it going. But yeah, Scott's been super supportive of it. Every time we get to talk to him, I double check that he's okay with us continuing to push it out there and use his good name. Because he gets very busy and sometimes we won't hear from him for a while. Like obviously he's in full, absolute Batman pumping mode.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so, he's been busy and there have been fewer classes recently, so we kind of have been like pushing it downfield without him. But I think that we've done a few issues already, and we've kind of earned his trust. So again, he lets us kind of have a little bit of leeway with it. And a lot of the creators are members of his Substack at a certain tier where you can actually send him your stories, and he'll give you feedback on it. So
Mhm.
he'll
Mhm.
meet. He actually does like what he calls office hours, where he'll meet with people for 10 or 15 minutes and go over their story, their idea, and he'll kind of give you a couple of notes and some feedback just based on what he's thinking when he reads it, which
Cool.
has been
Cool.
fantastic. I did it for Cicada Samurai. He read the first script before I sent it to an artist. Um, and that's like a terrifying thing. Scott is
Right.
like a busy, like, A plus plus, writer, like, and then he's taking time out of his whole life to just sit there and be like, so let's talk about the Grizzly Crew.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's talk about Pirate Bears, you and me for a minute here. Very serious talk about Pirate Bears.
Yes. Yeah.
It's funny, but yeah, it's he's been great. He's been super supportive. The stories go through a round of notes a lot of times from him, and he signs copies for the Kickstarter. Like he's very supportive of the whole thing. He's been really great.
Cool. Yeah. Well, one of the motifs that is kind of a part of the show, but it's also been really nice in our conversation is we've talked about superhero books, but there's also this wide range of storytelling that you can do in comics. So just excited that you're tapping into that and pulling in anything from gory Cicada Samurai to an anthology series that gets to push the envelope and kind of explore the medium that way too.
It's been one of our favorite things about the anthology is that the stories are from all over the place. Some of them are it's way in the future. Humanity is gone. It's a story about robots trying to raise the last human being in the world, and then you have other ones that take place in the old west, and you have zombie apocalypse stories that are horrible and sad, and then in the next issue there's a zombie apocalypse story that's like touching and sweet or outright funny, hilarious.
Yeah.
So yeah, the genres are, you can kind of do whatever you want. You can mix and find your own combination of things. You can do a two-page thing that's just a quick little cautionary fairy tale kind of a thing. Or you can do a really complicated kind of heady thing for a few pages. One of the stories from the original anthology was nominated for an Eisner.
Nice.
The Beekeepers do. So, it's some good stuff. Like the stories are really, really good. And, Veronica and I have been really kind of picky about when the stories are ready to publish. And if it feels like, sometimes a lot of people, and myself included, we're doing this as sort of a side hustle. It's
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
our hobby. It's something that we want it to be our career, but we're not, no one's like getting rich making comics, right? Not, well, a handful of people are, but not us, not now.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so, you know, we um we get it. Like sometimes a writer will come to us and have an idea, and then we put them on a timeline, and they need more time because
Yeah.
something came up, and so we move it to another issue. Like we don't rush it. We wait till it's right and good before we publish it. So we've been pretty good about keeping it really quality. And I think the books themselves are, 60 plus pages long. They're perfect bound. They're not stapled. So they come as like a little kind of graphic novel.
Mhm.
And they're yeah, it's great. We do on nice paper. It's very nice. The whole thing is like you feel it and you're like, oh my God, it's like a real thing. We did a real thing and it feels good, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to put something out there that now lives on as part of the comics history.
Wow. Now that's heady right there.
Yeah, yeah. Just let's soak that for a moment. Um, so if I'm a listener out there and I want to go support and find out more and see some of these books, where would be some places where I might follow along with your career and the things you're doing and support the campaigns?
So my comic imprint is called Thorny Comics, like a rose has thorns. Thorny
Mhm.
Comics. I'm at Thorny Comics on Instagram and on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm the only Thorny Comics on Facebook. Um, and you can, I mean, I'm also in all those places as Jerry Carita, so you can find me on all those places. And then thornycomics.com, my website will almost always redirect to whatever the most recent project is. So I've got two Kickstarter pre-launch pages going right now. One is for the first full issue of Cicada Samurai, that will launch probably in another month or so. And then the other one is for issue 3 of Scott Snyder Presents the Cloakroom. And that I'm going to hit launch on that sometime in the next 72 hours.
Awesome, awesome. So it is literally almost out into the world.
That's it.
Yeah.
Gonna be. It's a holiday issue too. It's a lot of fun. We asked them, we at the last minute we were like, let's push our whole plan for issue 3 to issue 4 and instead do a holiday issue. And then we kind of asked everyone quickly who has holiday stories, and we got pitched a lot of stories very quickly. And
Mhm.
I thought it was really funny because we let it be any holiday. So we have Halloween, we have a couple of Christmas stories, we have two Passover stories, no Hanukkah stories.
Interesting, interesting.
It's Hanukkah season, but we have two Passover stories, no Hanukkah stories. We accepted a birthday story, like we kind of let it be a little bit loose about what constitutes a holiday. But it's I think it's 8 stories, and it's going to be our biggest issue so far. And again, broad spectrum, really
Nice.
comedic stuff, and then really dark Christmas stuff, and really horror mixed with Christmas stuff, and Halloween mixed with like cautionary fairy tales. Like it's really great. I'm really excited about every story in it. So
Yeah, yeah. And I can see Passover lending itself to some interesting moods too. So,
oh
yeah.
yeah, one of them is like a sci-fi thing with aliens, and the other one is like it's a very comedic. It's a kid who is convinced that his cousin has been cheating at all the family Passover games for many years, and so his cousin gets to sit at the adult table, and he's stuck at the kids' table, and he's pissed. And this is the year where he's gonna uncover that his cousin has been cheating all these years. It's really funny. It's like a really funny story. Very
Nice,
excited about it.
nice.
You know,
Yeah. Cool, cool. Well, uh, glad to have you back anytime as the creating is continuing. I'm glad to share about your work. And it certainly sounds like there will likely be much more on the way.
yes, sir. Hope so.
All right, all
Thanks
right.
for having me,
Well,
Jason.
yeah, many thanks for your time and safe travels and may the creating continue.